Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our webinar here, hosted by Edison Primary School. My name is Christopher Mazur, and I'm joined by my colleague here, Adrian Hammond. And today we're going to be discussing new technologies in the classroom and how Apple is helping us support learning in a new way. Next slide, please. So when we think about education, we think about how education has been evolving since time and the way that the classroom has changed over the generations. Of course, the picture that we see here is a classic classroom here with the chalkboard and the students sitting at the desks with their book and kind of learning by repetition and through writing and sitting at their desks. But of course, education was much different back then, as were the times. Moving forward, of course, living in the future, we need to adjust the way that we teach our students and adjust the way that we plan lessons in the classroom because we are living in the future. A lot of jobs now are focused on technology, and moving forward, more so, more careers will require skills of being technologically advanced in the work field. And this is a picture that we kind of want to move away from. We want to create a new look for education in the classroom where students are more engaged, where students are more involved and not just staring at a blackboard for 45 minutes to an hour straight, sitting at their desks. Students need more hands-on learning. Students need different approaches in order to kind of develop these skills that the new workplace will require of our students in the future. Next slide, please. This is exactly where Apple comes into play. Edison Primary has become an Apple Distinguished School this year, and our lesson planning is based on the four main pillars of Apple, which is connected, collaborative, creative, and personal. These four pillars are significant in lesson planning and, of course, in teaching in the classroom, as each pillar brings something different to the classroom. Starting with connected. Of course, connected learning is more than just basic access to the internet and devices. It's technology used at its full potential, and it can provide students with quality content, new ways to access content, tools to make their learning relevant to the world that we live in now. It's very important to show students that the things that they're learning in the classroom can have an influence on the real world. And they can apply everything that they're learning into the classroom in the real world. And once they make that connection, once they connect everything together, this is kind of where learning steps up to the next level. Of course, another important pillar within the Apple program is collaborative learning. So if we think about education, we think about each student as an individual, which is of course important, but we have to think about students and how they work together in teams and how they work together as a class and how they learn together as well. Because it's not only about the individual, but it's about collaborating together. And collaborating with others allows students to explore different kinds of learners and different kinds of ways that they can learn in the classroom. So we're not only talking about just sharing documents and video conferencing, but there are many applications and technology that we can use to create different kinds of work together and that we can use to implement different sides of the curriculum all into one lesson. So it's giving more opportunities for individuals to work with others and learn how to collaborate together, which is also very important in the workplace in the future. Of course, we want students to touch on creativity. And creativity doesn't necessarily have to be confined to just art or a multimedia project. Technology is very important for creativity in different subjects as well, and how the students explore the world through tough problems and how they solve problems using the technology in the classroom as well. And of course, learning has to be personal. It has to be individualized. Not every student is the same. Some students are better at languages. Some students are better at math. Some students are better at the arts. So really this fourth pillar, being able to personalize the learning, students with disabilities. There are many different applications and different technologies that allow us in the classroom to kind of have this personalized approach. Okay, next slide. So of course, the main pillar here, the first pillar, is staying connected. The Apple applications that we use in the classroom help us stay connected at anywhere at any time. Especially during the pandemic, we found that this is something that's extraordinary and something that's very important for us. because the pandemic lasted about 2 years, where all of a sudden students had to move all of their learning online, which was something that was very new for them, something that was very different for teachers. And unfortunately, it happened quite quickly. So a lot of schools were in situations where they didn't know how to transfer the learning from inside the classroom to online. But thankfully, since we've been participating in the Apple program, we were already ready and connected to go during the pandemic, which was something that helped our students transition very easily because it was a very difficult time for them during the coronavirus. So being able to transition as smoothly as possible and making sure that students are still getting the engagement that they need and that they deserve at home as they did in the classroom was something that's very important to us. So of course, the built-in applications like Pages or GarageBand allow students to work together, allow students to stay connected. We don't only need one iPad. If we have a group of students with iPads, each student can be working on a different perspective of the project, and then they can share it together and stay connected. So that doesn't necessarily have to be all done on one iPad. They can all work together at the same time. And of course, the cloud-based services allow us to collect the information. They allow us to organize the information. It's very important for students, especially younger students as well, because sometimes they have too many notebooks. Sometimes they have too many loose papers all over the place. But something with like cloud-based services with Apple allows the student to build and create a portfolio of their work, and allows them to have everything in one place, and allows the parents and teachers to be able to access their work in one place as well, instead of finding one-off papers. Everything's in one place, a nice portfolio, and students are able to see how they develop as they're going through the school system. Next slide, please. And of course, teamwork. Teamwork is something that's very important in our day-to-day lives. It doesn't matter if you're a student. It doesn't matter if you're an adult in the workplace. People are everywhere. And part of being a human being is being able to connect and collaborate with others. And the same thing goes for the classroom and students in education. Being able to collaborate for different kinds of projects allows us to see how other people think and how other people approach problems and decision making. So allows students in the various applications to work together at the same time. Something as easy as airdrop sharing allows students to send off their work that they may be working on, allows students to kind of put together everything from a different perspective, as opposed to the traditional way where everybody had to be in one place and do everything on one paper and kind of pass the paper along. Well, this is now eliminated, as each student can be working and using their time to their advantage, and then at the end they can airdrop everything together and put it together as a team. That's something that's very important for us and for students within the classroom as well. Something as simple as FaceTime, bringing people together. This is something that a few years ago, especially at our school, would not be possible without the iPad. And as I mentioned earlier, during the pandemic as well, being connected is something that's very important, and collaborating at home, where people physically could not meet because they were stuck in lockdown, or we weren't allowed leaving our homes. And students were still able to collaborate. They were still able to be face-to-face through video. As opposed to maybe 10, 20 years ago, where, you know, you couldn't really get students on a phone call, everybody at the same time on a home landline. Things would be very difficult. So having this technology really helped us, especially with the pandemic. And even back inside the classroom, being back at school, it also allows students to collaborate quite easily. And of course, last but not least, where they're able to share reminders. So of course, students have busy lives, and part of being a student and growing up through the educational system is becoming more and more responsible for your work. So having students being able to set reminders and having everything in one place neatly put together is something that really helps students become responsible for their work. They're able to see when they have quizzes. They're able to see when they have tests. If they're working together, they're able to collaborate and put into the calendar, okay, I'll be finished my part of the project by so-and-so time on so-and-so date, and then we can continue working and moving further. So really collaborating together and with people is something that we see on our day-to-day lives, and that's something that we try to implement and instill in our students here at Edison Primary. Next slide, please. Creative, of course, creativity. Schools and the old way of learning, sitting at a book, remembering dates just to repeat them on a piece of paper a few weeks later, it really kills creativity. And of course, students at such a young age, they have a wild imagination that's very creative. And we don't want to kill that creativity. What we want to do is we want to lead that creativity. And the iPad supports learning through discovery, inquiry, creation across all subject matters. Students are able to be creative. Even if it's something like mathematics. Who says you can't be creative during mathematics? Who says you can't be creative during English lessons? Every subject within the curriculum has opportunities thanks to the iPad and new technologies in the classroom. Every child has a chance to be creative in their own special way. So there are tons of apps to create, to explore, and express ideas. We allow students and teachers to start creating right out of the box. So there are applications that come with the iPad. There's no need to download. There's not even a need for an internet connection to start being creative during lessons. Of course, involving the Apple Pencil to take notes and to sketch or to express concepts allows students to be creative in a much faster time period as well. Because as of the olden times, we would have to write everything in a notebook, copy everything off the blackboard. But here, students can be creative very quickly and get their ideas together very quickly. It's as simple as taking a picture, taking out your Apple Pen, drawing sketches, whether it be for science and kind of calculating the movement, the distance in physics. There are many, many different things, especially measuring. Now, students during math time can use their Apple iPad to measure things right off of their iPad. They can, calculate perimeter. They can calculate area of things in the real world that they can actually scan. So before, it used to be on a piece of paper. You would have a question. So-and-so has a garden that's so-and-so big and so-and-so big. Please calculate the area of the perimeter. But now students can actually go outside and use their iPad to calculate perimeter and area and different kinds of measurements in the real world, something that they see right in front of their face. And it really it shifts the learning from a piece of paper to real world applications. And this allows students to be very creative, and most importantly, it helps the students to stay engaged. And of course, screen recording during the pandemic was very important. In case a student may miss something, they may need to go back and look over what was happening during the lesson. They can voice record, they can screen record, and that allows them to take that information and move forward. Okay, thank you. Next slide. And last but not least, the fourth pillar here is making learning personal. Of course, every student is different. We want to individualize our learning here at Edison Primary. We want to empower learners to learn in their own way. Not everybody learns the same way. We have kinesthetic learners, we have auditory learners, we have visual learners. Not every student is the same, and students learn in different ways. So the iPad allows us and gives us a lot of assisting learning tools to help personalize the learning, the way that students think, the way that students create. It's very customizable. Even as something as easy as split screen, they can even open up multiple boxes. They can have 4 different screens running at one time in order to do what they need to do within the classroom. Maybe some students don't need all those screens open, but some students like to have all that information in front of them as they're working on a project, and that's something that they're able to do. They're able to take notes while watching a video at the same time. They're able to write an email while designing something at the same time. So it's very important that the Apple iPad gives us these tools to work with for teachers and students. And of course, students with disabilities. It has tons of applications for students that need help. Maybe students that English is their second language. They have text that speaks. So not only do they get to read the text, but someone reads the text back to them so they can pick up on accents, they can pick up on pronunciation. Maybe some students with speaking disabilities, they can type. It's very important, especially with this aspect, I would say the most, to kind of create this personal approach to learning. Students with disabilities, auditory learners, visual learners, all these things are very important in the classroom to help students be successful, and most importantly, to help students be engaged during lessons. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Okay, I think that was the last slide I have here. So I'm going to now pass on. I'm going to now introduce Mr. Adrian Hammond, who is going to tell you a little bit more about STEAM and how we implement that in our classroom here at Edison Primary. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to speak about STEAM in the classroom, and it is a buzzword and has been a buzzword for quite some time in education. It is an interdisciplinary method that links digital and traditional education methods. And when I think about it personally, we have to shift the traditional barriers that divide one subject from another. For example, mathematics and geography and also languages. We know that all subjects, and as we go through, are inherently linked to each other. And it's more of a skills-based focus and approach to learning that takes into account science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics, and combines all those skills that you can use and get from using the STEAM approach in education to have highly skilled learners at the end of the day when they finish school, that they're able to go out into the world, function very well at universities, go into the job market and become successful. And that's what we really are aiming to do as teachers. And when I look at my class and I think about the learners, I'm thinking about not necessarily always the subject matter that stays with them, that they just remember and recall, but the skills that they have learned that are very difficult to measure, the soft skills, the interpersonal skills, which I will speak about later, that we now merge the boundaries of our subjects and we bring them together and we create something far more interesting. May I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I'd like to answer the question, what exactly is STEAM in the classroom and why has it been a buzzword? And so it's an approach that takes elements of science, physics, even sometimes chemistry, uses technology like our iPads in our classroom, the computers, engineering and construction, mathematics, counting and calculating, and builds it into maybe one unit of a material. It doesn't matter if I'm doing something in language, I can still use elements of maths to accomplish the goal or to get them to measure, to think. It's about having the learners ask questions and using different tools to find a pathway and produce a good result in the end. So what we're looking at is we're looking at solving real world problems that students will face in the real world once they actually leave school. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is it that we want when we as teachers take the STEAM approach? Okay, we want them to consider a problem, to think about the problem, analyze it, and come up with a strategy of how they will take to the task. Consider, different ways, because problems can be solved in different ways. Experiment with things, and if they come up with a result, reflect on it. Perhaps modify something in the approach and see which would actually work better in the end. So I can speak about some of the things I've done in my classes that we've done, where they've done different experiments with eggs and the life cycles, and they've documented the growth of plants and recorded it, and so they've been able to go back and see and recall and modify different things like the amount of light or the amount of water when growing a bean plant and see how it affects. And these things, if they document it using a school iPad, they can see the real change. And I think that sticks with them in the memory a lot more than just having them read from a book. So to do experiments, to use the technology, but also to be critical of it. And I'll emphasize this point as well. So this was the way that we can do better. So we want to provoke thought in our learners, allow them to be critical of themselves, but also to be constructive later on. So that is part of the learning process. Next slide, please. So how do we begin? And it all begins with a shift in the way we think. My colleague Chris spoke earlier, that we have to shift our way of teaching from the more traditional blackboard notebook approach, that the teacher is the source of information. But now things have changed. Now, as a teacher, I see my role as being more of a facilitator, allowing the children to choose their own learning path. But that all begins with designing a very good question from the beginning to provoke thought. But I also need to ensure that I provide access to good material for the students to learn. Okay, that could be in the form of a good multimedia presentation, using audio, using video, using other visual prompts. And sometimes instead of presenting the topic of the lesson as a statement, but changing that into a question that the students at the end of the lesson can answer. And may I have the next slide, please? Okay, so how do we begin? Okay, at our school, at Edison, our younger learners, even from grade 0 to grade 3, they have IT lessons and they are become acquainted with modern technology. They grow up with it all around them. Many of the learners are really good at opening applications, typing in a Word document, taking videos, editing something, recording voice, presenting different programs, using that technology to assist them in getting their ideas across. And that's what learning is about. It's sometimes about an exchange of ideas, going back, thinking about them, criticizing them as well, of course, in a constructive way. But we have at our school access to our school iPads, where the learners have almost non-stop access that we can go and we can take and we can use, and there's a whole wide world out of there to discover, and that just provokes and engages them and makes them excited about learning. You bring an iPad into a class and you have them working on something constructive, the level of excitement is actually really, really high. So, of course, that doesn't come without drawbacks. We have to make sure that we as teachers guide them to appropriate internet content, okay, and of course, and that's why my role is not as a provider of information, but as a supervisor of what information is good for our students. So we always have to keep that in mind too when using modern educational technology in our school. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we begin? On the previous slide, I mentioned that we begin by exposing our students to different learning applications by allowing them access to this. I just put a few of the logos of some of the platforms and things that I use as a teacher. Some are more creative, some are more that I can use for slideshows, put in videos, interactive quizzes. Some of the things that I'm quite fond of to collaborate on ideas is Canva and Padlet, and I can use for maps. I enjoy using Google Earth, really fascinating. Really, students enjoy looking at maps. They learn about the world. They enjoy looking at the different layers, discovering things on their own too. So, yes, I think it's important that we use a wide variety of different learning applications, and each teacher has the freedom to choose to suit his or her needs best, of course. And of course, some applications would be more suitable for older students and some more for younger students. And it's about having the right skill to choose the correct application also for the task, and to ensure that the students have had maybe prior exposure or have had some form of guidance within the program. And if they are guided along, they are able to produce really good work. They become very interested in the lesson content, and often you'll have them going home and showing their parents, and you get positive feedback that they actually would like to learn even more. And so it's about stimulating our learners in the right way and making them want to discover the world. Next slide, please. So we try to be innovative as teachers. And it's very easy to sometimes fall into the trap of, going in, opening up a book and saying, okay, what topic we have, and providing information to the students. Sometimes we have to think about things in a different way. And that links to what I mentioned earlier. a little bit of criticism, but constructive criticism. Would there be a better way to do this? We as teachers have to ask ourselves that question before we go. Is there a more exciting way to do this poem? Is there a more exciting way to do this reading? If we're reading a novel in class, we can have multiple ways of doing extensions, of having them step into the role of a character, having them dress up, record it, edit a video. There's so many ideas that we can do. But I think it all begins with the language that we use. We just have to ask ourselves, is there a better way? Can we make it more exciting? And that's what we want to get our learner to be curious, excited, and engaged all the time. And of course, most importantly, on task and producing really good work. Next slide, please. Also, when thinking about a lesson and planning a lesson, we must also consider whether that information is useful. Because I'm sure many children, many students, I've heard it numerous times in my life, what good is this knowledge for me? Why do I need to know this? Pythagoras theorem, it's not useful for me. So we have to take this knowledge that we would like to convey and try to apply it to a real world situation. Also, allow them the freedom sometimes to choose the method to get there and develop their skills, find that those skills are applicable, because then it becomes relevant. And when something is relevant and they understand its use, the knowledge is more likely to stay. Next slide, please. How do we begin? Right, we allow students the freedom, of course, within a framework for our children, our learners, to produce their own projects, present their own ideas in a multitude of different ways, in the form of a presentation. Sometimes they can do it role play. Sometimes they can collaborate on tasks using something like Padlet, or I use a Jamboard where you can send a link and they can write their ideas together, even when they're at home, and they can share their things. They can copy links. They can use online learning platforms to share materials. And students, I think, will really have a voice, and they feel that their ideas are valued and are appreciated, and that also drives the learning process. Next slide. I think this type of using technology in the classroom, we are in an ever-changing world where the technology is changing day by day. We as educators have to keep up. We have to sort of predict what our world will be like in 10 years when our students, some of our students, graduate from school. What are the skills they're going to need to go through life? Is it about knowledge and recall? I don't think so anymore. I think we have a world of information all at our fingertips, but it's what we do with this information, how we understand the information. Where do we get the information from? How do we assimilate it into what we need to do by producing something? And that's what real work requires in the real world. So we must consider exactly where we are going. We have to know the end so that we know how we can plan a route to get there. Now, that is a difficult question because I think most of us don't know exactly what the world will look like, but we have to have a fair idea that this technology is changing, and so we have to keep up with it. We have to be current. I, as a teacher, must learn how to use new applications. I must test them myself. I can't show students without having tested them. Of course, there are applications which I feel more comfortable with and that I feel are more suited to some of my students, depending on their age level and their knowledge and skills level at time. And so other teachers would obviously prefer different methods, but we have to begin using them. And I noticed that children are very quick on the uptake with these things, and it isn't long before they begin teaching me. So it's also, I say, well, you see, I also learn from you every day. So I'm not just a source of knowledge, I'm also a learner, and I enjoy learning with you. And that's also another teaching tip that's for any teachers out there, that if you don't feel 100% confident in your subject knowledge that you can have children teach you, and you can go on a journey together. And that is quite a fun way to learn a new skill. Next slide, please. Teachers who use technology in their classrooms will inevitably, without doubt, create people who will be specialists in certain field of knowledge, and they will be individuals who have thought and considered things. Technology is always growing, as I said earlier. We need to just step in there so that we can move into the years ahead of us feeling confident, feeling good about things, feeling good about where we're going, and that we are shaping the leaders of the future, the people who are going to be company directors, maybe doctors, engineers, other mathematicians, maybe more teachers. I hope I'll encourage more people to become teachers too. Next slide, please. Okay, so I spoke a little bit earlier about some of the skills, and we can refer to some of the skills that I mentioned earlier as being soft skills, which are soft skills are ones that are difficult to measure and count. But some of the things that I want to look for in every task, good communication, right? Are the children able to communicate effectively? Are they able to get their ideas across? Are they able to be good listeners, first and foremost? Because to communicate, I think first you have to listen and then communicate your ideas succinctly and coherently so that it all makes sense. Teamwork, of course, everybody always talks about teamwork, group work. Children love working in groups. As long as we do it in the correct way, that each person and each member has a role in the group. That is something we keep in mind as teachers, making sure that each person is involved and each person has almost equal contribution or a different role in the group that they can contribute and feel valued. Problem solving, coming back to the question that we can pose instead of just a simple lesson topic. Sometimes we can pose a question, allowing them to solve the problem. They can develop their own strategies of how to get there and which road they will take or which path. Critical thinking, going back and reflecting on what they've done and saying, well, maybe had we used a different way, or had we used a different application, maybe that will work better, or maybe we need to rethink this design of our dragon that we did at school. Maybe we can count it a little bit better. Maybe we need to weigh something. So allowing the children to think critically, self-assess, say, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, and maybe some suggestions for the next time. And that's when we will see real learning take place. Of course, leadership skills are important. I'd like to emphasize that not everybody feels comfortable being a leader. But you will, if you allow children to problem solve in groups and work together on a project, the natural leaders generally come forward and they have the opportunity to shape their skills. And developing social and emotional intelligence, understanding the needs of others in the group, understanding also their own role as a participant in a lesson. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, communication, online learning platforms. And my colleague Chris mentioned earlier that these days we have consistent access to the internet and we are able to communicate with each other 24 hours a day. Okay, we can use applications like Google Classroom, Edmodo, Microsoft Teams, Class Dojo that I personally use in my class to engage. I want to build a community. It just assists us as teachers, and it assists the students as well as to keep up with material, using the calendar, submitting assignments, just keeping up with everyday tasks should be a way to simplify things. The other thing, some of the things that we share with each other acts as a motivator, inspires them, wants them to develops the sense of community. And that for me is important as a teacher, that I build strong relationships with my students, that I build a community, that each child enjoys coming to school, enjoys participating, and is simply inspired to become a better person every day. Next slide, please. Of course, teamwork and cooperation are essential life skills, and I think we should provide them with as many opportunities as possible from a young age to collaborate, to work together, to actually sometimes simply be together. I know that we use a lot of technology in the class, but sometimes we need also the physical human contact, and the technology is there to help us. So I try to take this approach in my classroom, that I have the students do some physical work and later incorporate the technology that would help them, and that they would work on it all together. So that's not that each person is necessarily always sitting on one iPad, but one iPad can be used in the group as a tool, because for me, as an English teacher, communication is essential, and that they speak to each other, but they use the technology as a tool, as a means to an end, and not simply as a device to look at, so avoid overly lengthy screen time. Next slide, please. Problem solving. Okay, spoke about this a little bit earlier. Okay, we can use the technology to pose questions, to assess children as well. It's a rich problem solving environment, which they can choose their tools to meet an end in the classroom. So asking questions, asking children to build something or to show something that actually has challenged them on a certain level, and so that their skill base develops as much as possible, that they are engaged, they're interacting with each other, using the technology to become better problem solvers. Next slide, please. As I said, critical thinking, use reflection activities. I like to use sometimes self-assessment techniques, assessing each other, assessing their own roles within the group. They can even do it in anonymous forms on the internet, using a Google form, for example. I've designed those things in the past, and those things have worked very, very well, that they can reflect on what was good and what was bad, and how to improve in the classroom. And the role of the teacher is to sometimes say how, ask those questions, how, why, what could have got better, what were you proud of, simply. And sometimes the positive feedback also drives them further to become explorers, to do more, to allow them to be more fascinated in your subject matter. So positive feedback, but also not forgetting the critical thinking of thinking, okay, where could I perhaps have done better? By asking those questions, we provoke thought in the learners. Next slide. I spoke a little bit earlier about leadership. Okay, it's a skill that needs to be nurtured. It's important to identify those leaders within your group and allow them and give them the platform to show some of the character traits. Positivity, right? Are they a person who's not complaining, but they say, right, let's do this, I'd love to do this, and they take responsibility and they take ownership of a task. That's important, that they're goal-oriented, that they know where they want to go, and they're also able to work hard. And even before they become leaders, they are a good listener. And I perhaps should have put that at the top, because I think that is a very important skill and one that we often forget about. Next slide, please. Developing social and emotional intelligence. So the social and emotional intelligence, what I mean by that is the understanding of each other, the relationships, which understanding that someone could be having a bad day, how to react to that, how to encourage sometimes. I've used role plays and stories, games, and sometimes simulation to help practice those skills in real context, usually when the need arises. And technology can, in actual fact, help me, so I can use sometimes something else, and I can get them to answer questions based on an audiobook or a short film or something that I can present to the learners in class, and they are then able to process this material and then reflect on it too, share ideas with each other. Next slide. And okay, just a few references at the end for anyone who would like to read a little bit more about some of the things. The blog one I've written, a Classcraft blog, nice, interesting blog to read. So I won't go into further detail, but the references are there if anyone would like to have a look. So thank you very much.